Hey guys, Raymond here. So some of you have been asking me about the China stock situation regarding the China stocks crash. Is now a good time to be buying some at a discounted price? So in this short video, I'll be sharing my thoughts and what we're personally doing. So over the last few days, I have a bit more time to think about the situation, specifically over the longer picture, the longer term implications. What's the bigger picture here? What the Chinese government is trying to do, and how does that, as an investor, how does that influence or impact my investments into these Chinese companies, right? So as investors, we always think about risk versus reward, right? So is there further downside to come? Right, and I'll share a bit about that later. And what's the reward, the upside, right? Is there a huge reward if I were to be entering into these companies right now? So on the bigger picture, right? I personally, this is just my opinion. I personally feel like this could just be the start of more interventions, more crackdowns from the Chinese government. From the Chinese government perspective, it makes sense for them, to be controlling, trying to implement more controls on these Chinese tech companies, because China has seen how things are playing out in the US, where these big boys have these big techs in the US have a bit too much perhaps influence than the politicians would like, right? And China is just trying to not let that situation happen, trying to remedy and trying to control the situation a bit better. So from the Chinese government perspective, it makes sense for them. But as an investor, how would that impact us, right? So I feel like, personally, I feel that with all these crackdowns, it make things harder for these bigger players like Tencent, Alibaba, JD, for them to grow. Not that they cannot grow, they will still be growing, but their growth might be a bit capped, or you might not grow as high or as fast or as unrestricted as they wanted to lah. Right? So this is where I thought a classic Warren Buffett quote might come in handy. So Warren Buffett said this before, right? It's far better to buy a wonderful company at a fair price instead of a fair company at a wonderful price. So what does that mean? So and I just shamelessly use another quote from Charlie Munger, right? So how do you balance just a decent company over a really, really good company, right? So if a company that is like decent and just making 6% return on capital, so let me just read this and then I will share a bit more color on this. So Charlie Munger said, right, over the long term, it's hard for a stock to earn a much better return than the business which underlies it earns. If the business earns 6% on capital over 40 years and you hold it for 40 years, you are not going to make much difference than a 6% return, even if you buy at a huge discount, right? So this is what Charlie Munger say. Conversely, if a business earns 18% on capital over 20 or 30 years, even if you pay an expensive looking price, pay a bit of premium, you will still end up with a much better result, right? So this is saying that, and why is that so, right? Because if you invest in a company that is like have a higher return on capital, higher return on investment, and you're growing at a much faster pace, 20%, 30%, definitely, even you buy that at a bit of a premium, the exponential and compounding effect, right, will lessen the price difference. They'll even out the price difference and end up, right, over the long period of time of 10, 15, 20 years, right, you end up actually making more. So this is where I thought, so what does that mean for us investors, right? So this is where I try to put things into perspective. These Chinese companies, if I were to invest in them, even right now at a perhaps an undervalued price, I would say it's fair to say that some of these Chinese companies, they are a bit undervalued or severely undervalued right now. But are these companies a fair company, using Warren Buffett terms, right? Is it a fair company or is it a wonderful company? How much can these companies grow? Right? So these companies, if we talk about the big players like Tencent, Alibaba, JD, they are growing at about maybe 20, 30% or 15% rate, right? Quite a decent rate. But with this intervention from Chinese governments, the future rate, personally, I think it might even slow down, or at the very least, it will not increase, right? So best case scenario, it will hold at maybe 15 to 25% ROI kind of returns, right? So this is where I thought, if I buy these undervalued companies and the returns I'm getting is only 15, 20%, can my money be put to better use? And I will try to buy a bit more wonderful company instead of these fair companies, right? So this is where I try to break it down into, is this companies actually a wonderful company or is it a fair company? So personally, I will say the situation right now, these big China companies, they are definitely at a discount. So wonderful price, right? But are they a wonderful company or a fair company? So in my own personal opinion, I think it's just a fair company because their growth rate right now, even without this whole Chinese intervention saga, they are growing at maybe 20-30% clip, and the growth rate might be slowing down with future interventions from the Chinese government. So this is where I will classify them as a fair company. And I would think right now, right, if I have, let's say, $10,000, right, and I can buy these undervalued companies, Chinese companies at undervalued price, that might sound like very sexy, right? Or like the right thing to do. But is there a better use for this money? So this is where I thought that personally, I will stay away from these companies, and I will prefer to buy wonderful companies, using Warren Buffett term, wonderful company at a fair price. So there are certain companies right now that perhaps not as cheap as, or because of market sentiments, they are not as suppressed as these Chinese companies. So companies like Tesla, City-Meter, CrowdStrike, these are just my own personal companies that I think will do much better in terms of their growth rate, right? So like Tesla, CrowdStrike, they are growing at an average of 50%, 60%, 80%, or even 100%, right? So using this Charlie Munger quote, if I were to invest in these companies, although the price that I pay might not be the cheapest, it might be just a fair valuation, or perhaps I pay a bit of premium of it. But if I hold it for the long term, right, 10, 15, 20 years, right, the results that I have will be much better than if I were to buy fair companies at a severe discount, right? So this is the point that I thought might make sense, that is relevant in this context, right? So to summarize this, right, my own personal thoughts is if one is investing for long term and don't mind some short term volatility, right? That means one really have the patience and a longer term outlook, right? I will prefer to put my money on these companies that have perhaps a higher growth return, right? So if you can find like perhaps Chinese companies that instead of these bigger players, like smaller cap companies that have a higher rate of return, I think that's okay, right? But personally, I feel like the bigger players like Tencent, JD, Alibaba, their growth rate might be a bit capped, right? So it really depends on, are you investing into, do you want to invest in a bit more stable companies? Are you okay with perhaps just 10%, 15% returns? Nothing wrong with that. So if you're fine with that, you're okay with a 5, 10, 15% year-on-year return, then these companies might have a part to play in your portfolio, right? But if you want like higher growth companies, then perhaps, this whole Chinese saga is just a distraction. You just noise out there because there's no actionable steps for you to do, because like for me, right, it's just holding on to the best companies, best of the best breed companies, right? So yeah, in short, that's it. Right. I hope you guys find this sharing, just trying to give you guys perhaps a different view, try to look at it from a different angle and just put things into a bit more perspective, right? See you guys.